6:30. Should we get started?
Sure.
Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to the first virtual author event in the Jean and John Rowe program series, associated with our exhibit My America, Immigrant and Refugee Writers Today. My name's Allison Sansoni, and I'm the program director here at the American Writers Museum. Thank you for your patience while we work out all of the technological kinks and figure all of this out for the first time. You can purchase books for tonight's program at our bookstore partner, Seminary Co-op. Ordinarily, I would just wave to you at the back of the room, but they're linked on the webinar invite that you received for this program. And you can also purchase them from our page at bookshop.org. If you'd like to ask a question while the discussion is going on, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom to do that once it's opened up. We have staff monitoring that, and we'll bring up some of those questions at the end of our talk. We're so glad to have so many of our members here with us tonight and to be making new friends through this medium as well. Our stories connect us through history in good times and in bad, and in difficult times they remind us that we are not alone and never have been, and as long as we can tell stories to each other, we never will be. We're very grateful tonight to be joined by writer Sahar Mustafah, whose novel The Beauty of Your Face was just published yesterday. Congratulations, and thank you for being
Allison.
Here with us.
I really appreciate it, and this feels especially meaningful being the first person, but then it also being Arab American Heritage Month. So it just feels like everything is falling in place, despite the pandemic. So thank you for having me.
Oh, we appreciate you making the time. Tell us first of all a little bit about the book and where the central story about FF came from. How did you first imagine her?
So I had written a short story about gun violence and a teacher in my short story collection. So it was a topic that has been close to my heart and mind for years. But it wasn't until the very tragic hate crime shooting of 3 young Muslim Americans in South Carolina did I decide, okay, I'm going to sit with that particular event, fictionalize it, of course. And that was basically the seed. So first draft was kind of an exploratory one through the Story Studio of Chicago, wonderful organization. And it sort of helped me decide on the focus, and that being Afaf. Before it became this book, there were multiple Muslim characters, and I just wasn't getting close enough to their stories. So I had to sort of step away and come back to it, and Afaf sort of materialized. So the hate crime had always been there. I knew I wanted to concentrate on that, and that be sort of the framing of the book. But Afaf's story just sort of emerged, and the writing became so swift after that. And I think the one character really allowed me to get close to the story that I wanted to tell.
Yeah. Really early on in the book, there was a passage that really struck me about, religious and cultural and national identity, when Afaf's daughter comes home and is asking if she can wear a hijab. And she's saying, and you write, hasn't every Muslimah asserted this collective identity to the world? There are a lot of different ideas in the book about identity, and Afaf's, her brothers, her parents, and the views of the school shooter whose actions bookend the narrative. What is your idea of identity, and how did you come to that understanding for yourself?
I think what I've discovered, and that has sort of nurtured this writing identity, is that there's not just one story, concerning identity, and that it is this amazingly multifaceted thing. And I wanted to accomplish a story that wasn't retelling sort of the single narrative of Muslims, of Arabs, of Palestinians. And so for me, identity is also fluid. And I think we sort of watch Afaf in the book um, sort of wear and throw off maybe a few. And it isn't until, midway through does she discover this Muslim identity. So it's not one that is even, existent at the beginning and in her family. So, yeah, I would say that, identity for me has been, just this experience of fitting into places, especially here in America. I lived in Palestine for a while, and sort of, moving through even phases, I guess. So, yeah, it's not a single story for me, and I think Afaf probably represents that in the book.
Mhm. Yeah. Did writing this book change how you explored your Palestinian heritage? You've dealt with it before in fiction, but how
Mhm.
was this story different?
Yeah, so in my short story collection, I focus a lot on the lives of Palestinian Americans. This one actually brought me closer to the Muslim heritage and faith. So that was probably the most significant element that I had to spend time examining. I'm obviously not a visibly Muslim person, so that was something that was just amazing to also research and get close to. So I wanted to make sure that that telling was authentic. So I would probably say that was the most not surprising but interesting part of this book. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. The book also deals, in a really moving way with Afaf finding community in her local mosque, and then what happens when she has to challenge that sort of newfound community and go against what one of the elders in that
Hmm.
community believes to be the right
Yeah.
thing. And she's so grateful to have these positive and loving relationships, but she finds as an adult that those relationships are more complicated than she thought. And can you talk a little bit about the tension between belonging to a community and asserting sort of individuality in the face of it?
Yeah. So that section, and I won't spoil the plot, was important to me to reveal that the stereotypical her finding Islam has now suddenly made everything better is not actually true, and that in the end she's still dealing with very flawed human beings who are also trying to preserve what they think are important secrets, I suppose. And at that point, as an educator, she has to make this moral choice that conflicts with a religious leader, this sort of matriarch who's become like her surrogate mother. So I wanted to make sure again that I was presenting dilemmas and characters that were very human, and that just because she comes to Islam, she was still going to have to face some hard issues, and I hope that that comes across meaningfully and authentically. Again, trying to avoid the stereotypical views, the single narratives of Muslims. And I actually enjoyed writing that particular chapter because here is someone who was a role model to her that she's having to challenge. And she has to make choices still. So Islam does not answer every question, and she's still very much a human being trying to navigate those tough situations.
Mhm. Well, and it's such a universal story too, in that, in terms of a coming of age story, that realizing that just because someone is your elder doesn't mean that they're always wiser, or that you have to make the same decisions they do, no matter how much they mean to you.
Yeah, yeah. And I think she has been sort of, well, her experience has been sort of devoid of stable adults, from the beginning.
Yeah.
And so here's someone who seems, flawless, and she's not, and IFF has to contend with that. And again, just reinforcing that even within the community, we are nuanced, and I again hope that representation, came across.
Yeah. Yeah. You talked in interviews and you talked a little bit just now about not writing sort of the stereotypical story of a Muslim immigrant family, and not writing for the white gaze or what white audiences may have come to expect of that kind of story. What do you have a community in mind that you do write for? And how do you view your responsibility to that community?
I definitely was writing for someone like myself, Allison, and I think that's probably what I've been doing since I've been writing professionally. So it's that idea of what is the book that I want to read? Let me try to put that book into the world. And quite frankly, I have been most nervous about my Muslim Arab Palestinian community reading this. I'm really interested in their responses to it. And I received a few days ago just a beautiful response from a fellow Muslim writer, and she really just boosted my confidence, because I'm thinking of my family, I'm thinking of my friends, and now seeing this book in their hands on Facebook, on Twitter, I want to make sure that I sort of have gotten it right. But what does that mean? I hope that it's one more unique story that I'm putting out, and not just sort of putting something that is expected. I hope that there are, surprises, but then also things that are very familiar to my community. I want them to be able to see themselves, but then also walk away with, oh yeah, that wasn't exactly my experience, but I can see that. Yeah.
Your characters in this book, they grapple with language as as immigrant parents, as immigrant children, and they move from English to Arabic and back again. How does your work in multiple languages influence your writing?
So that's a really good question. I always want to make sure that I get the Arabic as right as possible. I learned Arabic formally when I was transplanted to Palestine in the 80s. And so the idea of raising children here was actually not in the original plan for my parents. So we still actually have a house overseas, but the political climate is so volatile that we had to return after the first uprising there, the first Intifada. So I learned Arabic formally the way I would have here if I were learning Spanish. And that really changed the way I viewed myself, because I had no real sense of how much language is tied to my identity and heritage and my parents and their ancestors. And I've come to appreciate how language actually preserves heritage, especially when you're living in America. And we have so many racial identities. So in the book, I wanted to make sure that I presented in a way that did not confuse readers, but I was not going to be concerned if they didn't get something immediately. And I've had to sort of experiment with that, during the course of my career. In fact, I moved away from italicizing Arabic phrases when an editor of a feminist magazine, I had submitted a story, said, we don't do that here because that's othering the other. And it clicked, and I thought, oh, yeah. So here, I was still sort of influenced by that white audience, or the non-Arab, non-Muslim. And I thought, yeah, I think I need to reconsider. And it just made, I think, all of my writing after that authentic. And I really appreciated that experience.
Did you find that there were concepts that are easier in Arabic to express than in English, or vice versa?
Oh yeah, yes. There are some things that might have taken a bit more to translate completely, and some things that I just might not have included just because there felt it felt like too much of a barrier. But I think again, if I'm presenting Ataf and these characters, I could not shy away from the language of her parents, which is Arabic first. She actually is a fluent speaker. She is actually someone who helps her mother as her older sister does. So she's had this experience just like me of having English first and then sort of adopting the Arabic.
Mhm. Yeah. What so much of the book is about Afaf looking for that stability and looking for that sense of home that she feels that she should have but never really had with her parents. What forms your ideas of home? What creates the idea of home for you?
For me, it hasn't really been about physical place. I've come to realize now, just because I feel like I've been sort of existing between spaces. So I was born here, I was raised here, but didn't always feel like I always belonged. And when I finally lived in Palestine, I still was sometimes considered an outsider there because of my Americanness. And in some ways, yeah, that has had me think about privilege too, and being able to leave a place that is politically volatile and be able to thrive, here in the States. So for me, home has taken, I think, different forms, as long as I've been living. And I would say that for me, if I were to define home, it's definitely family, it's language, it's food, all these things that, again, I hope come through the book. So it's definitely not a fixed thing or idea for me,
Mhm.
especially
Those
being
are
Palestinian, I guess. Yeah, and just that the legacy of displacement.
Yeah, I was just going to say the things that you're
Mhm.
describing are all things that you can take with you
Yes,
if you're
yes,
physically
definitely.
somewhere else.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, for Afaf, it's so interesting, and I'm glad that in some of the comments and some of the reviews that I've come across, people seem to appreciate that she's not running away from this Arab home. She is starving for it, but with the dysfunction that's happening, with the major loss that she experiences, uh, that has become sort of shattered. And uh, through Islam, she finds another kind of home, I suppose. And it does feel like it comes full circle, I guess, especially with her father, but I won't say anymore. I don't want to give away plot, but I definitely think that with Ataf, she was just so starved for belonging, but belonging to her parents, belonging to a community, and it not necessarily being the white community, because she was rejected by them. She was also rejected by the Arab community when she's in high school. So she'd been floating, for a number of years.
Yeah. What was it about religion that you think that made her feel so at home, that made her settle there?
I don't think it was the religion first. I think what we see in the book is that it's the women. It's that matriarch who embrace her without any judgment. They don't look at where she's come from, the destructive behavior that she engages in, anything having to do with her family. She just is so unconditionally embraced by this wonderful circle of women. And in that sense, it feels quite feminist to me, because I know people are not able to reconcile feminism with Islam, but I think these women absolutely represent that. So she is first embraced by these women. and then comes to really engage in the ritual of Islam. And that was actually just so wonderful to write because again, we get back to this very human story, the things that she needs just as a young person. And it's love, it's friendship, it's mentorship that she needs, and that's what these women provide first. And then, I mean, because she, as you know, she doesn't begin wearing the hijab until much later after she joins that particular religious circle before their physical mosque is built.
Yeah. We're seeing in recent years, the Own Voices movement in literature, recognizing, increasing recognition of the importance of having people tell their own stories and see their own experiences represented accurately in the stories that they read. Where did you find commonality in literature, when you were starting out as a beginning writer?
Yeah. Well, you know what? And I was so grateful that the American Writers Museum allowed me to contribute a reading list that sort of shaped my identity as an Arab American and then my writing identity. So I would say that for me, it was with Naomi Shihab Nye. So she was one of the first Palestinian American writers who sort of mirrored my sense of being Palestinian in this country. But I would also say, other writers of color, including Jhumpa Lahiri, so her short story collection, Interpreter of Omens, to me, that was one of the first major books where I thought, oh, this is a non-white writer who is very much writing about these very universal things, but that are so steeped in Indian culture. I thought maybe there's a space then for me. And Leila Lelami was another, her short story collection, Hope and Other Dangerous Pursuits. And and then there have been just amazing writers who have influenced my own, I suppose, vision of myself and writing truthfully and not in a singular way and not worrying about what people expect, I suppose. And that, though, didn't come immediately. So, I was definitely still writing to the white gaze, I think, earlier in my career. But, now I just feel, sort of fortunate to be surrounded by this wealth of literature. So the hyphenated writer, I think, has really found, I think, an incredibly larger audience, it feels like. And I'm just grateful for writers who have sort of paved that way for me.
Yeah. Whose work are you reading now that interests you and excites you?
So I actually read a few people at a time, but let me see. I am currently reading a new book by an Iranian American writer, and that's called The Immortals of Tehran. So I've just started that, and I'm excited about getting through that. I'll be in conversation with that writer soon. And I think Leila Lalami, I'm going to keep coming back to her. So, the other Americans, and I'm excited about this nonfiction collection. Louise Erdrich, too. So she actually has been someone who I've read in just sort of minor experiences. And I just read a novel this past winter that just floored me. And now I think I need to go back and read more of her. I really love Elif Shafak, the Turkish British writer. She's amazing. And I think I can go on and on, Allison, but I try to make sure that I do balance between novels and short stories. I felt like I was a short story writer first, and I've definitely been more focused on novel writing. But again, just so many wonderful novels too and works that are coming out this year. but I'm definitely revisiting folks who I just had not had a chance to spend a lot of time with.
Yeah. Yeah. You also teach writing, and you, so
Mhm.
when you talk to, what are some of the things that you hear, from your students these days about writing? How do they feel about the importance of writing, and what are they looking for from you as a teacher?
So first of all, I tell them that I'm envious of them because they have technology, which has opened up so many platforms for them to share writing immediately. And I suppose I try to impart that there is an audience, that of course they need to be writing for themselves first, and that just might be in the form of a blog, maybe a journal, and sometimes it might not be published at all. But I don't ever want them to feel that their voice doesn't matter. And so I've been pretty fortunate because I've had always a mix of students in my creative writing classes who are writers by nature, and others who just might have even been dropped into my class because they needed an elective, and realize by the end, oh, I definitely have a lot to say, and I can do it, in any genre and hybrid. And there's someone, who can connect to it and identify. And if not identify, then they're creating these amazing windows, for others to look through. But even in my core classes, I emphasize the importance of writing just to understand themselves, to understand others, and it's such an act of empathy. Fiction writing is for sure, but then even nonfiction creative, you are taking risks, by sharing yourself with the world. And I hope that my young students appreciate how much writing matters, especially, now, especially during times like this too. I've been asking them to document this experience, of social isolation.
Yeah. Well, and so much of their communication, we see this with students who come to the museum as well, where, so much of their communication is written. And so,
Mhm.
they're texting, they're emailing, they are, they're writing all of their assignments, and that's how they enter the world and how they understand it. But they
Yeah.
don't tend to think of it or honor it
Yes,
as, real writing. And so,
absolutely.
yeah, they're sort of reticent to do that. So that's really great that you're able to encourage them and validate that.
Absolutely. And I would validate those writings too, so we've done some real cool experimental things. The poet Fadi Judah, he's got a collection that imitates its text language or the Twitter format. It's called Textu. And so they know that anything that they decide to share with me, to share with others, will be celebrated and honored. So I do appreciate that. Now, of course, there's always there's always a flip side in terms of formal writing and
Right.
essays and so on, and trying to get them, to switch gears, and get back into formal language. But I've had some really great discussions about what does that even mean, formal language, and uh, conversations about elitism, where language is concerned and so on.
Yeah,
So it's been good. Yeah.
that's great. Well, did you have a passage from the book that
Mm,
you wanted to read for us?
I
And
do.
and while you're doing that, I just want to remind people who are watching along at home that the Q&A, if they want to use the Q&A button to ask a question, then when you're finished, we'll delve into some of those
Oh,
questions in the
great.
audience.
And I really appreciate all of your questions, Allison. They were wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
So I'm going to read a section from 1976. This is the first decade or year that I look at concerning Afaf's life, because we start in the present tense when she is an adult principal of Nuruddin School when the shooter enters the building, and then we are swept back in time. So this is 1976. She doesn't answer her mother the first time she calls her name. Afaf! She keeps jumping on her bed. Afaf, where are you? Majid, her younger brother, is jumping opposite her on a twin bed. He freezes and cranes his head over the tune of Aquarius. The two of them play it relentlessly on a secondhand record player. A garage sale to Afaf's father is yet another novelty of American life. The first time he discovered one down their block, he told her mother, "These Americans sell their own belongings for profit." In the spring and summer, Afaf and Majid accompany Baba on strolls up and down the alleyways of their neighborhood, searching for open garages. The white owners sitting on lawn chairs, drinking beers and tossing their cigarette butts onto the gravel, haggling with their father. Their wives wear terry cloth shorts and halter tops, stark white tan lines cutting through sunburned skin. Afaf can't tear her eyes away from their sagging breasts. On their last trip, Baba purchased a record player from a man with an unkempt beard and glasses like John Lennon, and a desk lamp for $1.50, though Afaf's family did not own a desk in their cramped apartment. They do their homework on a chipped coffee table in the front room that her mother wipes down multiple times a day. Mama had turned her nose up at the record player. "Masari ala fadi," she scolds, a waste of money. The previous owner had thrown in an odd selection of albums, the Shangri-Las, Pat Boone, and Sam Cooke. Afaf and Majid have so far memorized every verse of Hair, her favorite record. Baba listens to Leonard Cohen, improving his English through songs. Suzanne sounds like a bottomless well to Afaf. On Sunday mornings, he strums his oud and sings ballads by his favorite Egyptian lute player, Farid al-Atrash. Not as unhappy as Leonard, Baba declares, as though both famous musicians are close friends of his. Afaf! The third time Mama calls her name, it's a sure sign of something serious. Afaf hops onto the brown check carpeting and bolts down the narrow hallway of the apartment. Majid sliding behind her in his tube socks across the wooden floor Mama mops every day. Her mother's on the phone, the yellow cord snaking around her fingers. A pot of fava bean stew boils on the stove, and a stack of dishes has been brought down from the cupboard, but Mama hasn't set them yet. Something's disrupted her mother's dinner activity. She's talking in frantic Arabic on the phone. Afaf guesses it's Khalti Nisreen on the other end, Mama's youngest sister, the only relative she has in the States, who lives 2 hours away in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Mama turns to Afaf with wide hazel eyes, two amber stones with flecks of green or gold depending on her mood. When she laughs, they are like tiny golden nuggets mined out of the earth. Fear and anger usually turn them green, the color they are now as Mama glares at Afaf. They are eyes only her brother Majid has inherited. Eyes Afaf covets every day. She's surrounded by a sea of white skin and darting blue and green eyes at Nightingale Elementary School. She has Baba's hair thick and wavy. Yes, Mama. Afaf stands as close to her mother as she bravely can. Mama scares her in a way she doesn't understand. Her mother is a beautiful woman who takes care of her and her siblings. She cooks every day. Afaf and Majid coming home to pots of maklouba and pans of kofta, spices reaching them in the stairwell before they open the back door of the apartment. Before bedtime, she bathes Majid. Afaf is allowed to wash herself now and lays out clean clothes for the next day. But there are other days when they come home from school and find Mama in bed, weeping. This lasts for a few days. On those nights, she hears Baba talking to Mama, his soft and consoling words muffled by her mother's sobs. Afaf moves carefully around Mama. She's like one of those floppy puppets at the carnival that you knock down with a ball. Afaf worries her mother might not get back up again from her bed. Did Neda tell you where she was going after school? Her mother demands, placing her palm over the receiver, though Afaf is certain her aunt hears Mama's desperate plea. It hits Afaf. Her older sister has not come home yet. She and Majid have been distracted by their singing and jumping, hadn't paid attention to the creeping autumn dusk outside the apartment. Neda is required to be home before the street lights turn on, before their father comes home from the factory. No, Mama, she didn't say anything to me. They both look at 7-year-old Majid, a futile action. He shakes his head. Why would her 17-year-old sister tell her little brother, or Afaf, anything about her mysterious life outside their apartment? Afaf is 10 years old, patching together small pieces of her sister, the hours Neda spent smoothing down strands of her thick brown hair, fastening them with tortoiseshell barrettes, or the sly smile that creeps across her face when she reads a letter on torn out notebook paper, folded and creased many times. The quilt Afaf has assembled of her sister isn't a whole person, only glimpses of a double life. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you. That was
Okay.
wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah, it occurred to me listening to it again, just how early you foreshadow a lot of the aftershocks that, reverberate throughout the book. And so when you were structuring it, were you, this is more of a process question, but did you do that from the beginning and lay it all out ahead of time, or did it sort of grow organically as you wrote?
So focusing on just one character, as I said at the beginning, when I sort of redrafted the very first idea, allowed me to think about Afaf in parts, periods of her life and phases. So what I had to decide was what were those phases going to be. And I had a sense that she'd be a little girl first. And I wanted to make sure that I also went into the formative teenage years. That didn't happen actually in a later draft. So I went back and thought, oh, that's just too important. I needed to definitely have readers see where she is during her teenage years. So definitely by decade, but then within decades, I had to make decisions about real momentous experiences that kept pushing her closer, towards the more significant Islamic transformation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we have a question here.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a full-time writer, and what does your typical day of writing, if there is such a thing, look like?
Oh, that's a great question. This was one of the very sweet questions that I get from students, which is, are you going to quit, Miss M? And so being a full-time writer is a dream. I am not. I'm actually very fortunate. I feel so privileged that I can teach full-time, which I love. So, it is definitely a job that has kept me financially stable, but I'm also passionate about. But writing, as my students have seen, has become this second life that I've been able to cultivate, which again, it really speaks to, fortune and privilege for me. So what I have to do during the school year is I am best in the morning. So I wake up 4:30, 5 o'clock before my school day begins, and I devote time to writing then. Summers are great, winter breaks, spring breaks are also wonderful, but I do most of my writing in the morning unless I have deadlines, and then I can, push through all day on weekends and things like that.
So we have another question. You mentioned your love of short stories. I'm curious to know whether your writing process changes when writing short stories and when writing novels.
Oh, that is another great question. Writing The Beauty of Your Face, I still was in that short story mode. So I feel like they are not exactly self-contained chapters. Obviously, one builds on the other. But I was able to still stay with that process when I was tackling a single experience. So I still very much, I think, approach writing as a short story where it serves me. I'm in a project now that follows 3 characters. And so I've done this thing where I've written them like long short stories, and now I'm in the process of weaving them together. So that has served me well for sure. Great question.
We also have a shout out from a childhood friend of yours from Palestine, Reina Razak.
Oh, great. I was so worried she didn't make it into the session. Hi, Nina. I love you.
And she wants to know when we can get the audiobook and from where.
Oh, This is great. So it's available from Audible, and two outstanding actors have taken that on. And one, I'm just so happy to have read the book. She is Palestinian American, so I was lucky because I was permitted to choose who I'd like to stage the reading of the book. So it is available on Audible now. I appreciate that, Rina. Rina and we actually went to school in Palestine together. So
Oh, that's
it's
great.
great to have her in the session.
Yeah. So then the next question is, how did the novel change in the editing process once it was acquired by your press and your editor?
Oh, really great question. So the shooter framing, I would say, was the most drastic transformation. So I had much longer chapters there. And my editor, Jill Bielowski, who is a poet, in fact, she's got a poetry collection coming out this summer. She was just wonderful. So she basically had me reconsider those longer chapters that took us away from Afaf's story a little bit too long. They still serve as what I wanted them to, and those are very sharp disruptions. So some things that readers have told me, they loved Afaf's story, but then here's a shooter who sort of, interrupts that. And that was quite deliberate. I did not want to have my audience forget that this very present, terrible threat, what was existing for Afaf and for her community. So I would say that the shooter probably transformed the most in later drafts. So now we just get almost just a quick glimpse before we are returned to Afaf's past, but just enough of that tension and that threat.
Yeah, I was intrigued by that choice too,
Yeah.
to include some of the shooter's perspective and because it didn't feel like an attempt to sort of humanize so much as an attempt to sort of create that urgency.
Yeah. And so if readers felt like he is indeed humanized, if Allison, that he remains nameless, and maybe in some ways that's part of not completely, humanizing him. But I guess I also, I wanted to get across that he wasn't born a shooter, and his journey to me is important in the same way that I wanted readers to not just meet Afaf in this really tense moment of being a principal trying to protect her kids. I wanted to make sure that, she was seen as a human being and not just a hijabi woman, and I guess, some of that also, felt like a meaningful responsibility, for the shooter without justifying his actions. And I think that's probably what we don't spend enough time on when we are confronted with horrible violence in this country. What are all these choices? What are all these experiences that bring Afaf and the shooter face to face? And that's what I hope is the journey that readers are going to appreciate by the time they arrive, at that really critical moment in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you create that pacing in that, when I was reading the book, I thought, this is just so masterfully crafted that it leads step by step. You see how each decision that she's made leads her to this crisis point. And, did you play around with that at all? Did you know immediately this was how you wanted to do it?
I did not. I mean, so I had that basic sense of, I was going to sort of unwrap her life, but there were some experiences that sort of emerged. And I thought, oh, this is a great stepping stone. I think I'm going to follow this particular thread. And I think others I sort of saw clearly. There's going to be an experience post 9/11, as you know, that felt, almost like I needed to sort of address that, especially because of where Afaf was in terms of her coming to Islam. But again, an example would be her teenage years and being like, oh, I'm so glad I came back to this because it's presented, this particular moment that continues to shape her or challenge her.
Yeah.
So I'm glad the pacing was successful. That's good to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have time for a couple more questions if people want to continue writing them in. We have one who's asking, what are you hoping readers take away from your story?
Oh, this is a great question. Um, you know, I've been asked about endings a lot, and this idea of hope. I think I want my readers to feel a sense of hope in the sense that uh, there's a possibility of change when we are confronted with pretty tense, violent, experiences like this. And, this is not meant to be a pedantic book that's supposed to teach a lesson, but I guess I want readers to see that, we all are coming from experiences that might be familiar and some that are going to be so divergent, but it doesn't make us any less human, I guess. And for me, that's where maybe the hope is in this book. So yeah, I guess I would want readers to feel like they might have seen maybe themselves, and if they're not Muslim, if they're not Palestinian, Arab, a woman, a hijabi woman. So there are those universal things, but that there are also going to be things that might be brand new, and so I hope I suppose a sense of empathy and sort of widening, expanding that.
You do sort of end on that note of hope and the idea that there's somewhere that we can go after this. Do you have a vision in your head of where FF has gone since the events in the book?
Yeah, I think, and I was going to say something, but it would give a plot point away. I do, Allison, and it is very optimistic. It doesn't this her life has really not left me, and I can say that she is still challenged. I don't think life was super easy. She does, she's confronted with the worst thing imaginable, but I think there's a lot of hope.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything about the book, about the reception that it's had that you wanted to talk about that we haven't hit on?
I guess the shooter framing. So I haven't yet read any passages, just because I wanted to make sure that FF was, the center. But I guess I want to make sure that readers know that it's not a graphic book, that it is just disturbing enough, but I still continue to get really just warm, beautiful messages from people who've received galleys and reviewers who've said that, sometimes it was difficult, but these characters were just so real, and they were so engaged by the trauma and the challenges of these characters, and that's what kept them, reading. And so, it was also something that caused some agents and editors to say, I don't want to have anything to do with it. Some along the line when I was querying asked me to drop the shooter, and I said that's not the vision of this book. I'm not just going to put out another quote immigrant narrative. This is me confronting something, in this moment that we're living in. And again, I hope I've done it justice, because I don't mean to speak, for the Muslim community. Fiction, of course, allows me to make all kinds of choices and to invent and reinvent. And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an important point, that the distinction between, it's not a ripped from the headlines, the shocking story of it. It doesn't feel exploitative, but it
Good.
still feels very immediate.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't want it to be a sensational novel. And like I said, I mean, people have just fallen in love with FF, and that is just so heartening. I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah. We have a question from our audience. What are some of the most challenging characters that you brought to life as you were writing about trauma in an authentic light, trying to break that single narrative?
Probably her mom. So Afaf's mom, Muntaha, as much as I loved writing her, she was challenging. I present this theme of mental illness, and we are also confronted with alcoholism. But her mother was, after the shooter, probably the more challenging one, because I really had to um, delve into what is it like for a child who has sort of an absentee mother. And it's a little different than, I think, having an absentee father. So those to me feel also very distinct. And then, of course, to endure this loss, which sort of compounds the mental illness, and is again compounded by her mother not really feeling like she belonged to America. So yeah, I would definitely say her mom. And I mean, there were moments where, and this might be corny, where I was just I was in tears, as I'm writing her mom and these moments. So I hope readers are just as moved.
Yeah. We have a comment from a reader saying, I'm looking forward to getting my book and reading it. And so I
Oh,
think that's,
great.
I think
Wonderful.
that's, if people who are watching, if you don't yet have a copy of the book, you can now order it from Seminary Co-op or
Yes.
bookshop.org. And
Thank you,
I think,
Seminary. What a wonderful bookstore. I appreciate them
yeah,
very, very much.
yeah. Any parting words for us before we end tonight?
I just want to thank everyone for giving this book time and attention, and for gathering here to hear me talk about this book. And Allison, it's been so wonderful. Your questions, uh, you have made me think about some things that emerge from this book that I might not have considered. So the beauty I think I'm finding with a novel is that you just don't know what is also going to move a reader. And so I want to encourage anyone who really has enjoyed this book to please reach out to, catch me on my website online. I'd love to hear, what you took away from the book. I thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us tonight, and thank you to everyone who's
Thank
tuned
you,
in,
everybody.
and we hope you all are staying safe and as well as you can in all of this. And we hope to be back in person as soon as we can. Next Tuesday, we're going to be talking with Ngozi Ukazu about her book Sticks and Scones, the second installment in the Check Please series. So please tune in for that, and keep an eye on our website and our brand new mobile brand new virtual exhibit site for more information. So thank you all for being here tonight, and everyone have a wonderful evening. Thank you
And
again,
stay
Sahar.
safe, everyone. Thank you so much, Allison.
All right, take care.
Okay.
Thank you.